I quite often find myself walking through the Sant Ocean Hall at the Smithsonian Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C. If you walk in through the rotunda, take a right underneath the giant model of the right whale, you'll find yourself next to a little aquarium tank that catches the eye of tons of visitors going through. It's usually got a little crowd around it. And I can see why. It's filled with brightly colored tropical fish, all kinds of corals and invertebrates, and a couple weeks ago I found myself standing in front of it looking really closely. And I saw something I'd never noticed before. Arcing out from the cavities in between some of the corals were long, tapering tendrils, as big around as my thumb and as long as my forearm. And they were covered in these thin, needle-looking spines, and they were arcing through the water as if they were searching for something, flexing and extending. And then I saw that their motion was partly driven by these extra little tentacle-like projections from the bottom that were marching the arm across the floor of the aquarium, and I asked myself, what the heck is that thing? I took a look at the display, and it said it's a brittle star, a relative of sea stars, the more familiar sea stars, but with much different anatomy of the arms. And it really stretched my imagination for what was going on with these arms. I would have thought an invertebrate with arms would be relatively simple, like having two little gooey worm-like things sticking out from the side. If you're an invertebrate, you don't have a backbone, gotta be simple, right? And so seeing that strange-looking arm really set me off on a quest to understand what a brittle star is, and how the heck they got so weird. I'm Adam Pritchard, and this is Pastime. Lots of Pastime episodes start out with me saying, I'm not an expert on today's topic, and this is definitely the case here. I know almost nothing about invertebrates, and in fact, Pastime really needs to pay more attention to those things that don't have backbones. We've only had one other big episode about invertebrates ever, focused on trilobites. So I needed to find an expert in echinoderms, the bigger group of invertebrates to which brittle stars, sea stars, and their relatives belong. And I found that in a friend of mine from Yale University.
I'm Elizabeth Clark. I'm a paleobiologist at Yale University.
Liz Clark is a PhD student in geology working in the laboratory of Derek Briggs. At the Briggs lab, they focus on all kinds of questions about invertebrate evolution and the early days of animal life on the planet.
A lot of people have this sense that invertebrates are less complex than we are, which I think isn't necessarily true. I think so many invertebrate animals are really understudied, but there's so many interesting things about them. An echinoderm is a group of animals that includes sea stars, brittle stars, sea urchins, crinoids, and sea cucumbers. There's 7,000 living echinoderms, 2,000 ophiuroids, and 13,000 fossil species.
That's a lot of echinoderms. And I know generally what a sea star is, the familiar starfish with their 5 kind of fat arms sticking out from the central body. I know a sea urchin, that's sort of almost ball-shaped animals with spines sticking out from all sides. I at least know the general anatomy of those two. But what about an ophiuroid? A crinoid? A sea cucumber?
So sea cucumbers are these kind of oblong, like turd-shaped, I don't know,
maybe
like
cucumber-shaped?
Cucumber-shaped echinoderms that live on the bottom of the ocean. Crinoids are these animals that kind of look like plants. They almost look like flowers, but they are animals. A lot of them live really deep in the ocean, but a couple of them live in coral reefs too. And brittle stars are the animals that I primarily study. They look kind of like sea stars. They have 5 legs, but instead of having kind of long, fat arms like sea stars have, they have a body that just looks like a circle, and then they have really long, tiny little spaghetti arms coming out of the circle.
And they almost look spiky, right?
The arms?
Yeah.
Yeah, the arms have little tiny spines coming off of them sometimes.
So I'm struck by the amazing diversity of anatomy that you can see in these echinoderms. They can look all kinds of different ways. What kind of features could unite a group that bizarre?
Echinoderms have several features. One that separate them from other animals. One is that they have a internal skeleton like we do, but it's made of similar minerals, but it has this kind of spongy texture called stereome.
When Liz talks about the bones of echinoderms, they're not the same as our bones in terms of their chemical composition. The common ancestor of us, the vertebrates, and echinoderms, as far as we know, didn't have anything that looked like bones. So this is an independent evolution of an internal skeleton.
They have muscles that they use to get around. Another feature is that all of the ones that are alive today have pentameral symmetry, which means they have fivefold symmetry, instead of animals like us that have twofold symmetry, like mirror symmetry, we're bilaterally symmetrical.
This one is crazy. Bilateral symmetry is what almost every animal on Earth has. Go from a worm to a fly to a whale to you. Instead, like the classic five-pointed star shape, echinoderms have 5 planes of symmetry that they can be divided along. That alone makes them radically different from other animals. But that's not all.
Every form of tissue regeneration known in the animal kingdom can be found in echinoderms. So echinoderms can regenerate their gut tissue, they can regenerate their nervous tissue, skeleton, bones. There's a lot of people studying echinoderm regeneration capabilities for its application to human regenerative medicine. Because they're so closely related to us, and because they have such widespread regeneration capabilities, we think that there might be really key applications for human regenerative medicine.
There are sea stars that have lost almost everything, almost 80% of their body, and basically just like a floating arm with a little portion of the center, and they can regrow it all.
Oh, they all have a structure called the water vascular system. So it's an internal network of fluid-filled cavities that these animals use for a variety of different functions like locomotion.
That hydraulic system in the water vascular system is what controls those little, I call them extra tentacles when I was talking about the ophiuroid arm, that stick out from the bottom. These are the tube feet, small extensions of the water vascular system that allow the animal to walk along the sea floor.
Vaguely position the arms in a certain way, and then the tube feet act like little guys carrying the... I think of it as like, this is a dated reference now, but that scene in Pirates of the Caribbean where there's a bunch of people underwater carrying a canoe, and they're holding it over their heads, and they're breathing through this upside-down canoe that's created a little air pocket for them, and they're walking, carrying the canoe on the bottom of the ocean floor. And that's kind of how it works, is that all of these little tiny tube feet kind of sit underneath this big structure and move around really quickly. But brittle stars, the animals that I study, they move much faster than all of the groups. They use muscles and skeleton just like we do.
So we have this incredible complex combination of muscles, bones, and hydraulic tube feet that can move that brittle star arm along the floor of the aquarium at the Smithsonian and arc around so elegantly, so quickly. No other animal does things like that. How long have echinoderms been able to do that? So Liz says that the fossil record of echinoderms has over 13,000 species. That's way more than are living today. But structures like tube feet in the water vascular system are like the organ systems of vertebrates. They're soft tissues, so they almost never preserve in the fossil record. From the journal Biology Letters, Water Vascular System Architecture in an Ordovician Ophiuroid. This is a report authored by Liz on an amazing fossil curated at the Cincinnati Museum Center. This ancient ophiuroid, over 440 million years old, still preserves some incredible structure.
So this fossil, it's a Protasterina flexuosa it's from Kentucky. It's from the Cincinnati, and it was a fossil initially described by Alex Glass because something that was interesting about it was that it had these tube feet preserved.
So being interested in how the weird locomotor abilities of echinoderms evolved all those hundreds of millions of years ago, this is the perfect specimen for Liz. She took it to a micro-CT scanning facility to get inside, to get a look at those tube feet and all the little stereome bone structures inside. But she was in for a shock.
Not only were the tube feet preserved on the outside, as had been described before, but they were all connected through this internal network of the water vascular system that was preserved on the inside of the animal as well.
This is an opportunity for the first time to look at the water vascular hydraulic system inside an ophiuroid from hundreds of millions of years ago. No one had ever really seen this in 3 dimensions. What Liz discovered was that the arm structure of Protasterina was not exactly like a modern-day brittle star. If you take a modern-day brittle star's arm and split the arm down the middle and open it up, the water vascular system is symmetrical. It kind of looks like a ladder, with little outpocketsing on the left and the right feeding into the tube feet so that they're paired. In Protasterina, you had the same number of outpocketings of the water vascular system feeding the tube feet left and right. But they were offset from one another, as if you took a ladder, sliced it down the middle, and offset the rungs by a half. So it formed a sort of zigzag, which suggests that some of the refinements to the water vascular system that allow modern-day ophiuroids to be some of the fastest-moving echinoderms were not yet in place 440 million years ago. We still need to delve into the fossil record to really understand when ophiuroids achieved their modern-day anatomy.
Echinoderms and so many other invertebrates are so strange. They have so many really weird features and functional structures that we really don't understand or know very much about. I think I think about this kind of comparison. There's been like hundreds of papers about the knee of humans, and we're always learning more and more about the knee. There was like a new muscle that was identified, or a new tendon or something just last year in the knee, with all of this work that's been done on it in the past. With brittle stars, there's exponentially fewer papers about brittle stars in general.
What's great about the research Liz has been doing on echinoderms is that she has been looking a lot at fossil animals, but she's also been taking approaches to look at living echinoderms. It's kind of surprising with living animals, but few scientists have really delved into how modern echinoderms function on the inside. So she's been using techniques ranging from 3-dimensional modeling, CT scanning, and even working with a robotics lab in Japan to understand motion. As with any good discovery in science, my biases have been upended. I've always had kind of the common bias that Liz mentioned at the very beginning, that invertebrates are simple and backboned animals are a lot more complex. With echinoderms, that's upended completely. I mean, think about it. These animals have completely independently evolved a skeleton from vertebrates. They have a muscle system, just like we do, but then they add this weird hydraulic system of the water vascular system on the inside of that, so their locomotion is based on all these 3 different elements. That's way more complicated than we are. So the next time you look into an aquarium and see a brittle star, or a sea star, or a sea urchin, know that that animal has an extraordinary system of bones, muscles, and water vasculature inside of it that, honestly, kind of puts our system to shame. And next time I pass that aquarium in the ocean hall, I'll look at those echinoderms with a bit more respect. I'm going to include a whole bunch of links to YouTube videos of modern-day echinoderm species moving around on the sea floors on the Pastime website. I cannot tell you how many hours I spent just watching sea pigs or sea cucumbers or brittle stars walk around. It's so bizarre and amazing how different they all are. So for more, check out our website, pastime.org. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter, Pastime Paleo, for updates on the show. Subscribe on iTunes, give us a review. I'm Adam Pritchard, and we'll see you next time on Pastime.